So, how does tyranny really take root in a society? Today, we're going to break down a research paper that offers a pretty controversial answer. It focuses on a specific group of people the author calls useful idiots, individuals who, according to this paper, unknowingly pave the road for their own oppression.
The paper kicks off with this really powerful idea that some people literally form a human bridge for tyrants to cross over. Now, that's a heck of a claim, right? So let's really dig in and unpack what the author means by that.
All right, so the framework we're exploring today comes directly from a paper by John L. Widdifield called The Anatomy of Tyranny. We're basically going to walk through the very specific historical pattern that he claims to have uncovered.
Okay, first things first, we've got to understand the central term here. The author is super clear that useful idiot is not just some insult he's throwing around. No, he's using it as a very specific political and historical category. So here's the definition laid out in the paper. It's talking about people who, and this is the key, often have the best of intentions. They champion an ideology, but they're completely blind to its actual endgame. They become these passionate defenders of a system that is, ironically, destined to crush them in the end. The paper gets even more specific, breaking this profile down into 4 key traits. First, they're ideologically earnest but intellectually unmoored. They really believe, but their beliefs aren't anchored in anything solid. Second, they're emotionally reactive, not rationally principled, so they're driven more by outrage than consistent logic. Third, they're super confident in their own morality but don't have the historical knowledge to back it up. And finally, the real kicker. They are absolutely convinced they're fighting for justice, while, in the author's view, they're actually helping tyranny take hold.
So you have to ask, how does this even happen? Well, the paper's central argument is that tyrants use a predictable 4-stage playbook to gain control. And the so-called useful idiots? They're essential to every single step of the process. Let's take a look.
And here it is, the author's 4-stage playbook. It kicks off with step 1, find existing anger and weaponize it. Then you move to step 2, isolate people from traditional sources of truth, family, history, you name it. Next, step 3, inflate your supporters' egos, making them feel like absolute moral heroes. And then, the final move, step 4, once you've secured power, you discard the very people who helped you get there. Let's dig into each of these.
Step 1. Now, the author makes a really crucial point here. This isn't about creating anger out of thin air. It's about finding real frustrations that are already bubbling up in society, things like economic pain or social injustice, and just pouring gasoline on the fire. The paper points to historical examples, like how revolutionaries harnessed the genuine anger of peasants or students to fuel their rise to power. Okay, step 2 is all about isolation. The paper argues that a key tactic is to systematically attack and undermine trust in our traditional stabilizing institutions: family, shared history, objective morality. The theory is, once people are cut loose from these anchors, they feel adrift, and that makes them much more vulnerable to a new, all-consuming ideology that promises them a place to belong. Now we get to step 3, and this is what the paper calls the psychological masterstroke. It's all about making your supporters feel like they are enlightened, moral crusaders on the right side of history. And according to the author, it's that constant validation that transforms a passive sympathizer into a zealous enforcer, someone who is willing to shut down any and all dissent for what they believe is a greater good. And finally, we arrive at the 4th and, frankly, most brutal stage, the discard. The paper's argument is that once power is locked down, those passionate idealists who helped the tyrant get there, well, they suddenly become a liability. They're true believers, which means they might actually question the new regime. The author points to things like Stalin's purges of old loyalists and the fate of French revolutionaries as the historical blueprint for this grim final act. Wow, this quote from the paper just brutally sums up that last stage. In this framework, your role isn't to inherit the new world you helped build. It's just to prepare the soil. You're the fertilizer. And once the ground is ready, you're disposed of. So that's the historical theory in a nutshell. But this is where the paper really pivots and takes this 4-stage framework and applies it directly to the here and now. And as you can probably guess, this is where the author's analysis gets its most pointed. The author draws these really direct, one-to-one parallels between past tactics and present observations. For instance, he takes the old tactic of isolating people from truth and says today that's being done at scale through digital echo chambers and manufactured media outrage. That old inflation of self-importance, he sees it today in what he calls equating the shouting of slogans with taking meaningful moral action. He's drawing a straight line. So why would modern people be so susceptible to this? Well, the paper dives into the psychology, pinpointing 4 drivers. It talks about a narcissism of moral vanity, the need to feel righteous without any real sacrifice, and the powerful seduction of narrative over reality. But maybe the biggest one is just the plain old fear of social punishment, getting ostracized or canceled for having the wrong opinion. These drivers, he argues, prime the pump for the whole playbook. And this all leads to what the author sees as the great inversion. He claims we are now at a point where people are actively cheering for things like censorship and surveillance, and they're doing it in the name of protecting democracy or preventing misinformation. But from his point of view, they're actually helping to build the very oppressive systems they think they're fighting against.
So if you follow this 4-stage pattern to its logical conclusion, the author makes a pretty stark prediction, a coming discard phase. His position is that today's activists and online enforcers will eventually be seen as inconvenient or even dangerous by the very power structures they helped put in place, and they'll be sidelined.
And this brings us right to the end of the paper, and to its ultimate and pretty sobering final warning.
The author leaves us with this final image. His whole argument is that we're looking for the wrong thing. Modern tyranny isn't going to show up with soldiers and tanks. It's going to arrive quietly, looking professional and bureaucratic. It'll be subtle, wearing a lanyard and telling you it's all for your own good.
And the final takeaway from the paper is this: the psychology and the 4-stage pattern of tyranny, they haven't changed throughout history, but the new digital tools we have to implement them have made the whole process faster, more efficient, and more pervasive than ever before. So we've walked through this author's entire framework for how he believes tyranny develops, and the final question it leaves us with is a personal one. It's not about whether you agree with him or not. It's simply this: now that you've seen this proposed pattern, how does it change the way you read the headlines you see every single day?